She raised her skirt to reveal the tattoo, and the general burst into tears the moment he saw it. Because that tattoo wasn't random. It was a mark tied to a mission erased from history, and a daughter he thought was dead. In front of an entire military assembly, a decorated soldier stands accused of treason, desperate to clear her name. But when she exposes the ink on her skin, it doesn't just shake the courtroom. It shatters everything they thought they knew. Why did the most feared man in the army collapse like a broken man? What secrets were buried with the past? And why are they suddenly too dangerous to stay hidden? What if the tattoo meant to save her becomes the key to a conspiracy that could destroy them all? And what happens when a forgotten daughter forces a war hero to remember everything? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you, then you're part of this story too. The Afghan sun had left its mark on Captain Brielle Townsend's face, deepening the lines around her eyes and adding new scars to the collection she already carried. As she stepped off the transport plane at Fort Braxton, her boots hitting familiar American soil, she fought to keep her expression neutral despite the ache in her recently healed shoulder. A group of junior officers snapped to attention as she passed. "Welcome back, Captain," one called out. Brielle nodded in acknowledgement, but kept walking. The weight of what happened during her last mission pressed down on her shoulders harder than her heavy pack. The base hadn't changed in the 6 months she'd been gone. The same rectangular buildings lined the paths, their white walls almost glowing in the morning light. The same American flag flapped in the breeze. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it, but Brielle felt different. Changed. "Captain Townsend?" a familiar voice called out. Sergeant Miller jogged up beside her, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Good to have you back, ma'am. The unit hasn't been the same without you." "Thanks, Miller." Brielle managed a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Miller had served under her command for 3 years. He was one of the few people she almost considered a friend. "That mission must have been something else," Miller said, falling into step beside her. "Everyone's talking about how your team extracted those hostages without losing a single soldier." Brielle's jaw tightened. "You know I can't discuss classified operations, Sergeant." "Of course, ma'am, sorry." Miller cleared his throat. "But whatever you did out there, it's impressive. The whole base is buzzing about it." They reached the main administration building, its glass doors reflecting the morning sun. Before Brielle could respond, Colonel Hayes emerged from inside, his expression grave. "Captain Townsend," he said, his voice clipped. "I need you to report to Conference Room Alpha immediately." Brielle frowned. "Sir, I haven't even had time to submit my preliminary mission report." "This takes precedence." The colonel handed her a sealed envelope. "These are your official orders. The hearing begins in 30 minutes." "Hearing?" Brielle's heart rate picked up, though her face remained carefully composed. "What hearing, sir?" "It's all in the orders, Captain." Colonel Hayes' eyes held something that looked almost like sympathy. "I suggest you review them quickly." As the colonel walked away, Brielle could feel Miller's concerned gaze on her. She opened the envelope with steady hands that betrayed none of the tension building in her chest. The official letterhead bore the seal of the Military Justice Department. "Ma'am?" Miller's voice was quiet. "Is everything okay?" Brielle scanned the document, each word hitting her like a physical blow. Terms like conduct unbecoming and violation of direct orders jumped out at her. This wasn't just a debriefing. This was something else entirely. "I need to go, Sergeant." She folded the papers with precise movements, tucking them into her pocket. "Thank you for the welcome back." She walked away before he could respond, her boots clicking against the polished floor. Other soldiers moved aside as she passed, their respectful nods a stark contrast to the summons burning a hole in her pocket. They saw her as the decorated captain who never failed a mission, who always brought her people home. In the bathroom, Brielle splashed cold water on her face and studied her reflection. The new scar along her jawline was still pink, a souvenir from the mission that was now apparently under scrutiny. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, evidence of too many sleepless nights replaying split-second decisions made under fire. She straightened her uniform, checking that every badge and pin was perfectly aligned. Whatever this hearing was about, she would face it with the same discipline and control that had kept her alive in countless combat situations. The walk to Conference Room Alpha felt longer than any patrol she'd led through hostile territory. Her mind raced through every detail of the Afghanistan mission, searching for anything that could have triggered this response. The operation had been successful. All objectives achieved, no casualties on either side. She'd followed protocol, made the hard calls when necessary. Outside the conference room, Brielle paused. Through the frosted glass, she could see the silhouettes of several high-ranking officers already seated inside. This was more than a routine review. This was a tribunal, and she was walking into it blind. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. The same instincts that had earned her multiple commendations were now screaming that something was very wrong. But like every other challenge she'd faced in her career, she would meet this one head-on. Brielle checked her watch. 0800 hours exactly. With one final adjustment of her uniform, she opened the door, ready to defend her actions and her honor. Whatever accusations awaited her inside that room, she would face them with the same courage that had defined her entire military career. The conference room fell silent as Brielle entered. 5 senior officers sat behind a long table, their faces stern and unreadable. At the center was Colonel Vincent Ashworth, his cold eyes fixed on her with predatory focus. "Captain Townsend," Ashworth said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Please be seated." Brielle took her place at the small table facing the panel. The room felt uncomfortably warm despite the air conditioning humming overhead. She noticed the recording equipment set up in the corner. This wasn't just a hearing, it was being documented for the record. "You are here to address serious allegations regarding your conduct during Operation Sierra Dawn," Ashworth continued, opening a thick folder. "The evidence suggests multiple violations of protocol that put both your team and our national interests at risk." Brielle's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, I followed all mission parameters exactly as specified." "Did you?" Ashworth's lips curved in what might have been a smile, but held no warmth. He pressed a button, and satellite imagery appeared on the wall screen. "These photos show your team's position at 2300 hours on April 12th. You were explicitly ordered to hold position until dawn. Sir, we received intelligence that the hostages were being moved. Waiting until dawn would have prevented unnecessary risk." Ashworth cut her off sharply. He produced a document and slid it across the table. "This is the official communication log. There was no such intelligence received." Brielle stared at the log, her mind racing. She remembered the radio transmission clearly, the urgent warning from their local contact. But the log showed nothing, just routine check-ins. "Furthermore," Ashworth continued, producing more papers, "we have testimony from 3 members of your team stating you ignored direct orders to withdraw when enemy forces were detected." "That's impossible," Brielle said, her composure cracking slightly. "My team fully supported the decision to proceed. The hostages' lives were at stake." "These sworn statements suggest otherwise." Ashworth's voice dripped with false concern. "It appears you've developed a pattern of reckless behavior, Captain. Your previous missions show similar incidents of insubordination, merely disguised by successful outcomes." He gestured to another officer who distributed more documents. Brielle's hands trembled slightly as she read through mission reports she barely recognized. Details had been altered, timestamps changed, critical context removed. Her successful rescue operation had been transformed into a record of dangerous violations and near disasters. "I don't understand," Brielle said, fighting to keep her voice level. "These reports are incorrect. This isn't what happened." "Are you suggesting that multiple senior officers have falsified official documentation?" Ashworth's tone was dangerous. "That years of mission records are somehow fabricated?" Brielle looked around the room, seeing only hostile or carefully blank faces. This was more than a simple review. It was a carefully orchestrated attack on her entire career. But why? "Permission to speak freely, sir." When Ashworth nodded, she continued, These allegations are false. I can provide detailed accounts of every mission referenced here. My record speaks for itself. Your record, Ashworth said, is precisely the problem. You've operated with increasing disregard for chain of command, endangering personnel, and compromising sensitive operations. The success of your missions does not excuse the methods used to achieve them. He stood, walking around the table to tower over her. We have satellite footage, communication logs, witness statements, and years of documented incidents. What do you have to support your version of events, Captain? Brielle's mind raced through options. Her team members who could verify the truth were scattered across different assignments. The local informant who had warned them about the hostage transfer was unreachable. Even her mission notes were still in her pack, unprocessed after her immediate summons to this hearing. I request time to prepare a proper defense, she said firmly. These accusations are serious and unexpected. I have the right to gather evidence and present my side fully. Of course, Ashworth said smoothly. You'll have 72 hours to prepare your response. During that time, you are confined to base and relieved of all command duties. If you cannot provide concrete evidence to refute these charges, you will face immediate discharge and possible criminal prosecution. Brielle stood at attention, her back straight despite the weight of the accusations. Understood, sir. Dismissed, Captain. Ashworth's voice held a note of satisfaction. I suggest you use your time wisely. As Brielle left the conference room, her mind was already shifting from shock to tactical analysis. The precision of the attack, the comprehensive nature of the falsified evidence, the timing immediately after a classified mission. This was no random investigation. Someone had orchestrated this carefully, and Ashworth was their instrument. Walking down the hallway, she could feel curious eyes following her. News would spread quickly. The decorated Captain Townsend, facing discharge for endangering her own team. But beneath her professional mask, determination was building. She had survived countless combat situations by trusting her instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that this was more than just an attempt to end her career. This was the opening move in a game she hadn't known she was playing, and whoever was behind it had just made their first mistake. They had given her 72 hours to fight back. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's parade grounds as hundreds of soldiers assembled in precise formation. The air hummed with subdued conversation and the rustle of dress uniforms. Brielle stood at attention in the front row, her medals gleaming against her pressed uniform, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her like smoke. I heard they have satellite footage, a lieutenant murmured behind her. 3 witnesses against her, another voice added. Career's done for sure. Brielle kept her eyes forward, her jaw set. The weight of her dress uniform felt heavier than usual, each medal a reminder of missions now being questioned. She had earned every commendation honestly, through blood and sacrifice. Now each achievement was being twisted into evidence against her. A sergeant's voice cut through the murmurs. Attention on deck. The assembled soldiers snapped to perfect stillness as General Harrison Kellerman strode onto the raised platform. His presence commanded immediate respect. Tall and distinguished, with graying hair and weathered features that spoke of decades of service. His chest bore rows of medals that told stories of valor few could match. Brielle had heard countless stories about Kellerman. His iron discipline was legendary, matched only by his tactical brilliance. Some called him Stoneface for his famous emotional control. In 23 years of command, no one had seen him lose his composure. At ease, Kellerman's voice carried across the parade ground without need for amplification. He surveyed the assembled troops with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. When his gaze passed over Brielle, she felt a strange moment of connection, quickly broken as he continued his scan of the formation. The ceremony began with its familiar rhythm of speeches and presentations. Distinguished visitors were recognized, promotions announced, medals awarded. Through it all, Brielle maintained perfect military bearing, even as she felt the weight of suspicious glances from her fellow officers. Colonel Ashworth stood to one side of the platform, occasionally whispering to other senior officers. Their eyes would dart to Brielle, then quickly away. The message was clear. Her disgrace was already being treated as fact. "Today we recognize excellence in service," Kellerman continued, his voice carrying undertones of authority earned through years of command. "The soldiers before us represent the highest standards of military conduct and dedication to duty." The words struck Brielle like physical blows. Excellence in service, highest standards. Everything she had worked for, everything she believed in, was being stripped away by falsified evidence and manufactured testimony. A junior officer approached with a message for Kellerman. The general's expression never changed as he read it, but his next glance at Brielle carried an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Something had changed. The ceremony continued, but now there was a subtle tension in Kellerman's bearing that hadn't been there before. His legendary composure remained intact, but Brielle's trained eye caught minute signs of internal conflict, a slightly too long pause between sentences, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. "Captain Townsend," Kellerman's voice suddenly rang out, front and center. Brielle stepped forward, her movements precise despite the sudden pounding of her heart. 100 scenarios raced through her mind. Was this where they would publicly announce the charges? Make an example of her? She climbed the steps to the platform and stood at attention before Kellerman. Up close, she could see the deep lines of responsibility etched in his face, the burden of command evident in his bearing. But there was something else in his eyes as he looked at her, something that seemed almost like recognition. "Your record speaks of exceptional service," Kellerman said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent parade ground. "Multiple combat deployments, numerous commendations for valor under fire." Brielle could feel Ashworth shifting uncomfortably to her right. This wasn't following his script. "Sir, yes, sir," she responded, keeping her voice steady. Kellerman studied her face with an intensity that seemed to look past her features to something deeper. His legendary composure flickered for just a moment, so briefly that only someone standing as close as Brielle could have noticed. The general's hands, usually steady as stone, trembled slightly as he reached for a document on the podium. The movement was tiny, but to those who knew his reputation for iron control, it was as shocking as if he had shouted. The assembled soldiers remained at attention, but Brielle could feel the ripple of confusion moving through their ranks. Something unprecedented was happening. General Harrison Kellerman, the man famous for his unshakable discipline, was showing visible signs of emotional disturbance. The ceremony hung suspended in that moment, Kellerman staring at Brielle with an unreadable expression, Ashworth tensed like a coiled spring, and hundreds of soldiers watching in confused silence as their legendary commander's composure cracked for the first time in 23 years of service. Time seemed to slow as Brielle faced the assembled soldiers. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her voice rang clear across the parade ground. "Sir, I request permission to present evidence regarding the accusations against me." A murmur rippled through the ranks. Colonel Ashworth stepped forward, his face darkening. "This is highly irregular, General. The proper forum for such matters is—" "Granted," Kellerman cut him off, his eyes still fixed on Brielle with that strange intensity. Brielle took a deep breath. Everything hinged on this moment. Her mother's last words echoed in her mind. "When there's no other choice, show them who you really are." "Sir, the evidence that will clear my name is permanent and personal," she said, her hands steady despite her racing pulse. "With your permission, I need to show you something." Kellerman nodded, his weathered features tense with barely contained emotion. In one fluid motion, Brielle reached down and lifted the hem of her uniform skirt, just enough to reveal her right thigh. There, etched in black ink against her skin, was a tattoo she'd carried since birth, a complex geometric pattern surrounding a distinctive insignia. The reaction was immediate. Several senior officers gasped. A colonel in the front row stumbled backward as if struck, but it was General Kellerman's response that silenced everyone. The legendary commander's face drained of color. His hands gripped the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. "Delta Unit 7, he whispered, the words carrying in the sudden stillness. "Lisa's mark." Brielle's heart skipped a beat at the mention of her mother's name. Kellerman's famous composure shattered completely. His legs seemed to give out, and 2 officers rushed forward to steady him. Tears streamed openly down his face as he stared at Brielle with a look of devastating recognition. "My God," he choked out. "You have her eyes. How did I not see it before? You have Lisa's eyes." Colonel Ashworth moved forward, confusion warring with calculation on his face. "General, sir, what's happening? What is Delta Unit 7? But Kellerman wasn't listening. He pushed away the supporting officers and stepped toward Brielle, his hands trembling as he reached for her face. 23 years, he whispered. They told me you died with your mother. They showed me the bodies. The assembled soldiers watched in stunned silence as their unshakable commander broke down completely. Brielle stood frozen, her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her as the pieces clicked into place. Her mother's secrets, the fake identities, the constant moving. It all led here. "Sir," she managed, her voice thick with unshed tears. "My mother. She told me the truth before she died last month. She said when I needed help, this mark would lead me to someone I could trust." Kellerman's next words dropped like bombs in the silence. "I was there when this mark was tattooed, a security measure in case the worst happened. Only 3 people knew its meaning. Myself, your mother, and the doctor who delivered you." His voice cracked. "My daughter." The word echoed across the parade ground. Brielle felt the world tilt beneath her feet. All her life she'd believed her father died before she was born. Now he stood before her, the legendary General Harrison Kellerman, breaking down in front of hundreds of witnesses. "Clear the parade ground," Kellerman's aide barked, finally breaking from his shock. "Everyone dismissed. Now." As soldiers began filing away in confused clusters, Kellerman reached out and pulled Brielle into a fierce embrace. She could feel him shaking with suppressed sobs. "I thought I lost you both," he whispered against her hair. "They made me believe, all these years." Colonel Ashworth backed away slowly, his face a mask of barely concealed panic. The false evidence against Brielle suddenly took on a more sinister meaning. This wasn't just an attempt to destroy her career. It was part of something much bigger. Brielle stood in her father's embrace, her own tears finally falling. The Delta Unit 7 tattoo that had been her birthright now burned with new significance. It wasn't just a mark of identity. It was proof of a conspiracy that had torn her family apart 23 years ago, a truth so dangerous that her mother had chosen to fake their deaths to protect it. The late afternoon sun caught the geometric patterns of the tattoo, still visible where her skirt remained raised. To most eyes, it looked like an elaborate military insignia. But Brielle now understood it was much more, a key to unlocking secrets that powerful people had killed to keep buried. As father and daughter clung to each other on the empty parade ground, the weight of 23 years of separation crashed over them both. The truth had finally emerged, but with it came the certainty that their enemies would soon learn that both Brielle and the secrets she carried had survived. General Kellerman led Brielle to his private office, his hand trembling as he shut the door behind them. The late afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. His eyes never left her face, as if afraid she might vanish if he looked away. "I need you to understand everything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "About Delta Unit 7, about your mother, about why we kept so many secrets." Brielle sat in one of the leather chairs, her heart racing. After years of questions, she was finally going to learn the truth. The general, her father, paced the room, gathering his thoughts. "Delta Unit 7 wasn't just another special operations team," he began, running a hand through his gray hair. "We were different. Your mother, Lieutenant Lisa Townsend, she was our intelligence specialist. Brilliant mind, beautiful spirit." His voice caught on the words. "We fell in love during a mission in Southeast Asia, kept it secret, had to, given the chain of command." He stopped at the window, staring out at the parade ground where everything had changed moments ago. "When Lisa told me she was pregnant, we knew we had to be careful. The unit's work was classified at the highest levels. There were people in Washington who didn't want certain truths coming to light." Brielle leaned forward, What kind of truths? Evidence of corruption at the highest levels of military command, weapons deals with enemy forces, money laundering through defense contracts. He turned to face her. Your mother was the one who uncovered most of it. She had a way of seeing patterns others missed. His eyes grew distant with memory. The day you were born, we took precautions. The tattoo, that intricate design, it wasn't just a unit insignia. It contained encrypted data, a failsafe if anything happened to us. Lisa insisted. She said a baby's birthmark wouldn't draw attention, but it would be permanent. Tears welled in Brielle's eyes as pieces of her past clicked into place. Mom never let me cover it up. She said it was special, but she wouldn't tell me why. Kellerman nodded, his own eyes glistening. 23 years ago, when you were 5 years old, everything fell apart. There was a bombing at a safe house where Lisa was storing crucial evidence. They showed me the bodies. A woman and a small child burned beyond recognition. The DNA tests were conclusive. His voice broke. Or so they told me. He crossed the room and knelt before Brielle's chair, taking her hands in his. I believed you were both dead. The grief, it nearly destroyed me. I threw myself into my career, became the soldier everyone expected me to be. Cold, disciplined, empty inside. But Mom got us out, Brielle whispered. She told me before she died. We moved constantly, used different names. She said she was protecting me, but she never said from what, or from whom. Lisa was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else, Kellerman said, pride mixing with pain in his voice. She must have discovered the plot against us, faked your deaths, gone underground. All to keep you safe. He squeezed her hands. To keep our daughter safe. The word daughter hung in the air between them, heavy with 23 years of lost time. Outside the office, they could hear the murmur of voices as news of their revelation spread through the base. The people who tried to kill us back then, Brielle said slowly. They're the same ones who falsified evidence against me now, aren't they? Kellerman's face hardened. They must have discovered who you are. The timing of these accusations, right after your mother's death, it's not a coincidence. He stood, military bearing returning even as emotion still clouded his eyes. Your mother was the bravest person I've ever known. She sacrificed everything, our love, her career, her identity, to protect you and the truth she uncovered. Brielle touched the spot where her tattoo lay hidden beneath her uniform. And now that truth is literally marked on my skin. A message from your mother waiting 23 years to be delivered, Kellerman said softly. She knew someday you'd find your way back to me, knew I'd recognize that mark, even if I didn't recognize my own daughter's face. The admission seemed to overwhelm him again. He sank into the chair opposite Brielle, his shoulders shaking. My little girl. All this time, you were alive, becoming a soldier, following in our footsteps without even knowing it. The hardened military commander was gone, replaced by a father facing the weight of 2 decades of grief and loss. Brielle watched as tears rolled down his weathered cheeks, his composure completely shattered. I see so much of her in you, he whispered. The way you hold yourself, the fire in your eyes, even the way you walked into that hearing, refusing to back down. Pride and love mingled in his voice. My daughter, Lisa's daughter, alive. General Kellerman pulled a worn photograph from his wallet, handling it like a precious treasure. The image showed a younger version of himself with a beautiful woman holding a small child. All 3 were smiling, caught in a moment of pure happiness. This was taken 3 weeks before everything fell apart, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Your mother had just uncovered financial records linking 3 senior generals to illegal arms sales. The evidence showed they were selling classified weapons technology to foreign agents. Brielle took the photo with trembling hands, studying her mother's face. Lisa Townsend looked vibrant and determined, her eyes bright with intelligence. She never kept photos, Brielle said softly. Not a single one from before. She was always careful, Kellerman nodded. Lisa discovered the generals had connections to a shadow network within military intelligence. They were using defense contracts to launder money, selling secrets to the highest bidder. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. He leaned forward, hands clasped tightly. The night before the bombing, she called me, said she'd found proof that went all the way to the Joint Chiefs. But before we could meet, his voice trailed off, the memory still raw after 23 years. Mom told me pieces before she died, Brielle said. She said she'd arranged everything in advance. Fake identities, emergency funds, escape routes. She grabbed me from preschool that morning before the bomb went off. That sounds like Lisa, Kellerman smiled sadly. Always 3 steps ahead. She must have placed decoy DNA samples, created a paper trail that would convince everyone you were both dead. Even I believed it. The evidence was ironclad. Brielle stood and walked to the window, processing the weight of her mother's actions. We never stayed anywhere more than 2 years. Always had go bags packed, multiple escape routes memorized. I thought she was just being overprotective, maybe dealing with trauma, but she was keeping us alive. Your mother was the most brilliant tactical mind I've ever known, Kellerman said. She would have planned for every contingency, created layers of protection around you both. She homeschooled me until high school, Brielle recalled. Taught me 4 languages, advanced mathematics, military history. I thought she was just passionate about education, but she was training me, wasn't she? Preparing me to survive. Kellerman nodded. She knew that someday the truth would have to come out. She was giving you the tools you'd need. We lived in 12 different cities, Brielle continued, memories flooding back with new meaning. Changed our names 6 times. Mom worked remote IT jobs, always under different companies. She installed her own security systems, checked for surveillance every day. She turned back to her father. That level of paranoia. It wasn't paranoia at all, was it? No, Kellerman said grimly. Those people, the ones who tried to kill you both, they have resources, influence. They've spent decades building their network, protecting their interests. Lisa knew exactly what they were capable of. Brielle sank back into her chair. A week before she died, Mom started acting strange, more nervous than usual. She kept checking her old encrypted laptop, making calls from burner phones. Then she told me about you, about Delta Unit 7, made me memorize names, dates, account numbers. She must have known they'd found you, Kellerman said. Her death, was it really natural causes? The doctors said heart failure, Brielle replied, but doubt crept into her voice. Everything seemed normal, but Mom was healthy, active. It happened so suddenly. And within months, you're facing false accusations that could destroy your career, Kellerman added. They're trying to discredit you before you can act on whatever information Lisa passed on. Brielle touched her thigh where the tattoo lay hidden. She always said this mark would protect me when I needed it most. I never understood until today, when I saw your face in that ceremony. Kellerman's eyes filled with tears again. 23 years of believing I'd failed to protect you both. And all that time, Lisa was out there, keeping you safe, preparing you for this moment. He reached across and took his daughter's hand. She sacrificed everything, our life together, her career, her identity, all to protect you and the truth she discovered. She never stopped loving you, Brielle said softly. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at nothing, this sad smile on her face. Now I know she was thinking of you. The revelation hung between them, a bittersweet testament to Lisa Townsend's courage and sacrifice. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across Fort Braxton. Father and daughter sat in silence, both mourning the woman who had given up everything to protect them both. General Kellerman's office buzzed with tension as he and Brielle pored over decades-old files spread across his desk. Her mother's encrypted laptop sat open between them, its screen displaying financial records that Lisa had meticulously gathered over the years. Look at these transfer patterns, Brielle said, pointing to a series of transactions. They match exactly with insurgent attacks in 3 different provinces. Someone was feeding them intelligence about troop movements, helping them avoid our patrols. Kellerman leaned forward, his face tightening as he recognized familiar names. These accounts, They're linked to defense contractors that Colonel Ashworth supervised, the same ones that supplied weapons to our units in those regions. A sharp knock interrupted them. Lieutenant Parker, Kellerman's aide, burst through the door, his face pale. "Sir, we found something in the classified archives. Documents about Delta Unit 7. They've been accessed recently by Colonel Ashworth's security credentials." Brielle's head snapped up. "When?" "3 months ago," Parker replied. "Right after your mother's death." Kellerman's jaw clenched. "He's been watching you, waiting to see if Lisa passed on any information. That's why he fabricated those charges against you, to discredit you before you could piece it together." More evidence emerged as they dug deeper. Financial records showed a complex web of shell companies, all connecting back to weapons that had disappeared from military inventories. Each missing shipment corresponded with increased insurgent activity in specific regions. "It wasn't just arms dealing," Brielle said, her voice tight with anger. "They were selling tactical information too. Patrol routes, security protocols, base layouts. They're still doing it." Kellerman pulled up personnel files on his computer. "Look at these transfer orders. Every officer who started asking questions about missing inventory or suspicious supply chain discrepancies. They were all reassigned or forced into early retirement. Ashworth's signature is on every document." He's been cleaning house, Brielle realized, systematically removing anyone who might expose their operation, just like they tried to do with Mom's unit 23 years ago. The evidence painted a damning picture. Colonel Ashworth wasn't just covering up past crimes, he was actively protecting an ongoing conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. The same network that had forced Lisa Townsend into hiding was still operating, still profiting from American military secrets sold to the highest bidder. These weapons transfers, Kellerman pointed to recent reports. They're showing up in conflict zones across 3 continents. Advanced targeting systems, prototype armor, classified communications equipment. They're arming both sides, making millions while our soldiers die in the field. Brielle's hands clenched into fists. That's why he was so quick to move against me after Mom died. He thought she might have told me everything before. She paused, realization dawning. Her heart failure, it wasn't natural, was it? "Not likely," Kellerman said grimly. "Ashworth's team probably discovered she was still alive. They must have traced her through the encrypted searches she was running on their operations." Lieutenant Parker returned with another file. "Sir, we've found correspondence between Colonel Ashworth and 2 retired generals. They were all part of the original review board that cleared the bombing of Delta Unit 7 as a terrorist attack." The pieces fell into place. Ashworth and his conspirators had used their positions to cover up their crimes, manipulating evidence and eliminating witnesses. When Lisa Townsend had discovered their scheme, they had tried to kill her and her family. Now, decades later, they were still operating with impunity. "The corruption goes deeper than we imagined," Kellerman said, studying the network of connections they had uncovered. "Ashworth is just one part of it. There are senior officers, defense contractors, politicians, all profiting from this betrayal." "Mom knew," Brielle said softly. "She knew how big it was. That's why she kept us hidden for so long. She was waiting until she had enough evidence to expose the entire network." Kellerman nodded, his expression hardening with determination. "And now we have that evidence. Everything Lisa gathered, plus proof of their continued operations. Ashworth's attempt to destroy your career gave us the thread we needed to unravel it all." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Through careful manipulation of military bureaucracy, Ashworth and his allies had built an empire of corruption. They had used their positions to facilitate arms deals with enemy forces, profiting from the very conflicts they were supposed to be fighting. "They've been operating in plain sight," Brielle said, disgusted, "using their authority to cover their tracks, silencing anyone who got close to the truth. How many soldiers died because of their greed?" The evidence they had gathered painted a clear picture of betrayal at the highest levels. Colonel Ashworth's connection to the original conspiracy that had threatened the Kellerman family was now exposed, along with proof of his ongoing criminal enterprise. The same network that had forced Lisa Townsend into hiding had continued their operations for decades, growing more powerful and more dangerous. Brielle sat in her father's office staring at the encrypted files on Lisa's laptop. Something nagged at her memory. Her mother's final words, spoken in a weak whisper from her hospital bed 6 months ago. "The truth is in the marks," Lisa had said. "Remember what I taught you about maintaining them. The coordinates will lead the way." At the time, Brielle had been too grief-stricken to understand. Now, looking at the Delta Unit 7 insignia on her thigh, her eyes widened with sudden recognition. "Dad," she called out, her voice trembling, "I need a mirror and paper, now." General Kellerman quickly brought her a small mirror from his desk. Brielle positioned it carefully, studying the familiar design she had maintained faithfully since childhood. What she had always thought were merely decorative numbers around the unit's insignia suddenly took on new meaning. "Look at these sequences," she said, carefully copying the numbers onto paper. "They're not just part of the design. They're coordinates, latitude and longitude positions." Kellerman leaned closer, his military training immediately recognizing the pattern. 6 sets of coordinates, disguised within the artwork. Your mother. She tattooed them onto you when you were 5 years old. "She made me promise to always keep the tattoo clear," Brielle said softly. "Every few years, she'd take me to get it touched up, making sure the numbers stayed sharp. I never questioned why it was so important to her." Lieutenant Parker quickly entered the coordinates into a mapping system. Red dots appeared on the screen, marking locations across 3 continents. "These are all remote locations," Parker noted. "Mountains, deserts, abandoned industrial sites." "Weapons caches," Kellerman breathed. "Lisa must have discovered their storage locations, places where they kept evidence of their illegal arms deals." Brielle traced the familiar lines of her tattoo. She knew they would destroy any evidence they could find, so she hid the locations somewhere they would never think to look, on her 5-year-old daughter's leg. "The perfect insurance policy," Kellerman said, pride and sadness mixing in his voice. "Even when they forced you both into hiding, the evidence remained safe, hidden in plain sight." Images from satellite surveillance began appearing on Parker's screen. Each coordinate revealed carefully concealed storage facilities, some built into mountainsides, others buried beneath desert sands. "Mom's final message makes sense now," Brielle said. "She knew she was dying, probably knew Ashworth's people had found her. She wanted to make sure I understood the tattoo's significance after she was gone." Kellerman studied the locations. These facilities would have required massive resources to build and maintain, the kind of operation only high-ranking military officials could authorize. "And they're still active," Parker reported, examining thermal imaging data. "Regular vehicle traffic at 3 of the sites, recent construction at 2 others." Brielle felt a complex mix of emotions: awe at her mother's foresight, grief for the burden she had carried, and determination to use this evidence to expose the truth. "She turned me into a living map," Brielle said quietly. "Every time she looked at this tattoo, she was reminded of why we were hiding, why we could never stay in one place too long." "Lisa knew the evidence had to survive," Kellerman replied. "She understood how deep the conspiracy went. These locations contain proof of decades of illegal weapons deals, enough to bring down everyone involved." Parker's computer beeped with an incoming transmission. "Sir, initial reconnaissance shows large weapons caches at the first 2 locations, modern arms mixed with older stock. Serial numbers match shipments that were reported destroyed or lost in action." "The complete trail," Kellerman said. "From weapons that disappeared 23 years ago to their current operations. Lisa found their entire supply chain and made sure the evidence would survive." Brielle stood, her hand resting on her thigh where the tattoo had been a part of her for so long. "All these years, I thought it was just a tribute to Delta Unit 7. I never imagined I was carrying the key to exposing their whole operation." "Your mother was brilliant," Kellerman said softly. "She knew they would search every computer, every piece of paper. But a child's tattoo? Nobody would think to look there for classified intelligence." The coordinates had become more than just numbers. They represented Lisa Townsend's determination to protect both her daughter and the truth. She had encoded the evidence into Brielle's skin, trusting that one day the meaning would be revealed. "She made sure I would keep refreshing it," Brielle said. Regular touch-ups to maintain the clarity of the numbers. She was protecting the evidence, making sure it would be readable when it was finally needed. The significance of her mother's actions struck her anew. Lisa had turned her own daughter into a living document, preserving crucial evidence while simultaneously keeping Brielle ignorant of its importance, protecting her from the burden of knowledge until the right moment. Parker continued updating the maps as more surveillance data arrived. Each coordinate proved to be another piece of the puzzle Lisa had pieced together, now finally revealed through the marks she had hidden on her daughter's skin. Brielle sat in her father's leather office chair, the weight of revelation heavy on her shoulders. Her mind drifted back to that sterile hospital room 6 months ago, where her mother's final words had seemed like fever-induced ramblings. Now they carried profound meaning. "I remember every detail of that day," Brielle said softly, her father standing nearby. Mom had been so weak, but her eyes, they were crystal clear when she started talking. The memory washed over her. Lisa Townsend, pale against white hospital sheets, had gripped Brielle's hand with surprising strength. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, but her voice remained steady. "My beautiful girl," Lisa had whispered. "There's so much I need to tell you, and so little time left." Brielle's throat tightened as she recalled her response. "I told her to save her strength, but she wouldn't listen. She knew it was her last chance to explain everything." "What exactly did she tell you?" Kellerman asked gently. "She started with you, Dad. She said, 'Your father is alive and he's a good man.' Then she told me your name, Harrison Kellerman. She explained about Delta Unit 7, how you two fell in love during classified missions." Tears formed in Brielle's eyes as she continued. Mom described the bombing that forced her to run. She had discovered the weapons trafficking operation and knew they would kill us all to keep it quiet. She said faking our deaths was the only way to keep us alive. Kellerman pulled up a chair beside his daughter, his own eyes glistening. "Lisa always put your safety first." "That's when she told me about the tattoo," Brielle continued. "She was getting weaker, but she insisted I understand. She said, 'The marks on your leg aren't just a memorial, they're a map.' I couldn't risk writing anything down, so I put the truth somewhere they'd never look." The memory of her mother's desperate urgency filled the room. Lisa, fighting against time and failing strength, had tried to pass on 23 years of secrets in her final hours. "She made me promise to decode the coordinates after she was gone," Brielle said. "But she warned me to wait until I had protection, until I found you. She knew they were watching her, that they might come for me next." Kellerman nodded slowly. "She was protecting you until the very end. Mom told me she'd been tracking their operation for decades, gathering intel while we moved from place to place. Every new weapons cache she discovered, she memorized the location. She said the coordinates in my tattoo would expose their entire network." Brielle stood and paced the office, reliving those final moments. "Her last words were about you, Dad. She said, 'Tell Harrison I never stopped loving him. Tell him I'm sorry I couldn't find another way.'" The room fell silent as father and daughter absorbed the weight of Lisa's sacrifice. She had given up everything, her career, her love, her identity, to protect her family and preserve evidence of the truth. "I didn't understand it all then," Brielle admitted. "The coordinates, the conspiracy, why she'd kept us hidden for so long. But she knew that when the time came, when I finally found you, it would all make sense." "Your mother was extraordinary," Kellerman said. "She turned her own daughter into a living testimony, knowing that someday you'd be strong enough to use that evidence." Brielle touched her thigh where the tattoo lay beneath her uniform. "She made me promise to maintain it, but she never told me why. Every few years she'd take me to a new tattoo artist, always watching to make sure they didn't change a single number. She was preserving the evidence," Kellerman explained, "making sure those coordinates would remain clear and accurate. In the hospital, she kept repeating, 'Trust the marks, trust your father.' She knew she was leaving me the tools I'd need to fight back." Brielle's voice cracked. "Her final gift wasn't just the truth about my past, it was the means to secure justice for our future." The memory of Lisa's last breath hung heavy in the air. She had died, knowing she'd done everything possible to protect both her daughter and the truth. trusting that Brielle would eventually understand the full significance of her legacy. "Mom chose to carry this burden alone for 23 years, Brielle said. "She raised me in hiding, trained me to be strong, and encoded the evidence into my own skin. All while knowing she might never live to see justice done." Kellerman reached for his daughter's hand. "But she made sure you would. Everything Lisa did was to ensure that someday you would have the power to expose the truth and end this conspiracy once and for all." The full weight of her mother's sacrifice settled over Brielle. Lisa Townsend had transformed her greatest vulnerability, her love for her daughter, into her strongest weapon against their enemies. She had hidden their most damaging evidence in plain sight, protected by a mother's love and a daughter's innocence. Colonel Vincent Ashworth paced his office, his polished boots clicking against the hardwood floor. His carefully constructed world was crumbling. The tattoo, the coordinates, the connection between Kellerman and Townsend, it was all spiraling beyond his control. His reflection in the window showed a man whose composed military bearing had begun to crack. 23 years of careful planning, he muttered, straightening his uniform jacket. "I won't let it fall apart because of some encrypted coordinates on a soldier's leg." He pulled up the base's training schedule on his computer. His fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as he created a new entry. Emergency Response Simulation, Classification Level Alpha. The official orders would require both General Kellerman and Captain Townsend to participate in person. Lieutenant Carter knocked and entered with a stack of papers. "Sir, the modified training protocols you requested." "Excellent." Ashworth signed the documents without reading them. These would create the paper trail needed to justify everything that was about to happen. "Make sure these are filed immediately." "Yes, sir." "And the special equipment for tomorrow's exercise?" "Being delivered to Training Zone 6 as we speak." Ashworth allowed himself a thin smile. The remote training area would be perfect, far enough from the main base to avoid witnesses, but close enough to maintain radio contact. "Have maintenance check the brake systems on all vehicles. We wouldn't want any accidents." "Understood, sir." Carter hesitated. "Should I inform General Kellerman's staff about the schedule change?" "I'll handle that personally." Ashworth's voice carried just the right note of authority. "This is a sensitive operation. We need our most experienced officers evaluating our emergency response capabilities." After Carter left, Ashworth reviewed his plan. The training exercise would simulate a terrorist attack on a military convoy. Kellerman and Brielle would be required to participate in the field evaluation. Their vehicle's brake lines would be subtly damaged, not enough to fail immediately, but guaranteed to give out on the steep access road to Training Zone 6. He picked up his secure phone and dialed Kellerman's office. "Harrison, Vincent here. We've got an urgent training requirement tomorrow morning. Yes, I know it's short notice, but this comes from above. We need you and Captain Townsend to evaluate our emergency response protocols." Ashworth's voice remained steady as he laid out the trap. 0800 hours at Training Zone 6. Full tactical gear. We'll be running convoy protection scenarios. He paused, listening. "Yes, I understand you have other commitments, but this takes priority. Direct orders." Hanging up, he allowed himself to relax slightly. Everything was in motion. By this time tomorrow, both Kellerman and his daughter would be victims of a tragic training accident. Their deaths would bury the conspiracy forever. Across the base, Brielle sat in her father's office studying the official orders that had just arrived. "This feels wrong," she said, handing the papers to Kellerman. "An emergency training exercise? Now?" Kellerman frowned as he read. "Ashworth's pushing this hard. Says it came from higher up, but something doesn't add up. We've got evidence that could destroy him, and suddenly we're both required at a remote training site." Brielle stood, her combat instincts firing. "It's a trap." "Almost certainly." Kellerman set the papers down. "But we can't refuse direct orders without tipping our hand. If we show any suspicion, he'll find another way to come after us." Brielle touched her leg where the tattoo lay hidden. "Mom always said the most dangerous predators were the ones wearing friendly uniforms." She was right. Kellerman checked his watch. We have 12 hours before the exercise. Not enough time to decode those coordinates and expose Ashworth through official channels. So we walk into his trap? Brielle's voice carried a mix of frustration and determination. We walk in smart, Kellerman corrected. Ashworth will have planned everything carefully. He'll need it to look like an accident, something that won't raise questions. They spent the next hour reviewing the training zone maps and protocols. The steep access road, the remote location, the requirement for full tactical gear that would weigh them down. Every detail pointed to a carefully orchestrated accident waiting to happen. As evening fell, father and daughter prepared their equipment for the morning exercise. Both knew they were heading into deadly danger, but military discipline required them to follow orders. Their only advantage was knowing it was a trap. 0800 hours tomorrow, Kellerman said, checking his tactical vest. Whatever Ashworth has planned, he'll want it to look legitimate. That means following proper protocols until the last moment. Brielle nodded, understanding the grim reality of their situation. They would have to play their parts perfectly while watching for the killing stroke they knew was coming. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Brielle and Kellerman arrived at the motor pool where a convoy of 3 vehicles waited. Ashworth stood by the lead vehicle, his uniform immaculate, his smile carrying just a hint of triumph. "General Captain," he greeted them. "Thank you for making time for this essential training. Shall we begin?" The morning sun cast long shadows across Training Zone 6 as the convoy moved into position. Brielle sat in the passenger seat of the middle vehicle, her father behind the wheel. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The radio crackled with Ashworth's voice from the lead vehicle, calling out training parameters. "First scenario begins in 5 minutes," he announced. "Remember, this is a live fire exercise. Safety protocols are in effect." Brielle checked her tactical vest, noting how the extra weight would slow her down. Her father's hands remained steady on the steering wheel, but she could see the tension in his jaw. They both knew danger was coming. They just didn't know from where. "Movement on the ridge," Kellerman muttered, nodding toward the rocky outcrop ahead. Brielle spotted the glint of metal, training targets being raised into position. Standard procedure for this type of exercise. The convoy stopped in a small valley surrounded by observation posts. Ashworth's voice came over the radio again. "Commence simulation. Hostile forces approaching from multiple directions." The first explosion caught everyone by surprise. What should have been a harmless training charge sent real shrapnel tearing through the air. Kellerman jerked the wheel hard left as metal fragments shattered their windshield. "Dad!" Brielle reached for him as blood appeared on his uniform. Several pieces of shrapnel had torn into his right shoulder and chest. He slumped forward, fighting to stay conscious. More explosions rocked the valley. Through the smoke, Brielle saw muzzle flashes from the observation posts. Live rounds, not training ammunition. This was no accident. This was an execution. "Stay with me," she ordered, pulling her father from the driver's seat. Blood soaked his uniform, but his eyes remained alert. She dragged him behind their vehicle as bullets sparked off the metal around them. "3 shooters," Kellerman gasped, pressing his hand against his wounds. "Maybe 4. Professional." Brielle assessed their situation with cold precision. The vehicle offered temporary cover, but they were pinned down. The other convoy vehicles had scattered, leaving them isolated. Ashworth was nowhere in sight. "Can you move?" she asked, checking her father's injuries. The shrapnel hadn't hit anything immediately fatal, but he was losing blood. "Not fast enough," he grimaced. "You need to—" "I'm not leaving you." Brielle's voice carried the same iron discipline she'd learned from him. She pulled out her sidearm and checked the magazine. Live rounds. At least they hadn't replaced her ammunition with blanks. Another explosion sent dirt and rocks showering over them. The attackers were trying to flush them out. Brielle spotted movement to their left, a figure in tactical gear moving between rocks. She fired twice, the figure dropped. "They'll have radio communication," Kellerman warned, his breathing labored. "Coordinated attack pattern." Brielle nodded, already analyzing their options. The training course had been designed with multiple cover positions and firing lanes. What was meant to be a teaching tool had become a killing ground. Gunfire erupted from their right. Brielle returned fire, forcing the attacker back. She counted shots, tracked movements. These weren't random soldiers. They moved with the precision of experienced killers. "Save your ammunition," Kellerman advised. His face was pale, but his military mind remained sharp. "They'll try to draw you out." As if confirming his words, another explosion detonated behind their vehicle. The heat wave washed over them as their cover began to burn. They couldn't stay here. Brielle spotted a concrete training barrier 20 yards away. It would offer better protection, but reaching it meant crossing open ground. She looked at her father's wounds, calculating his chances. "I can make it," he said, reading her thoughts. "Just, I need help." She wrapped her arm around his waist, keeping her weapon ready. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1. They moved. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet as Brielle half-dragged, half-carried her father across the gap. Her combat training took over. She fired twice at movement above them, heard a cry of pain, kept moving. They reached the barrier just as another explosion shook the ground. Kellerman collapsed against the concrete, his breathing ragged. Brielle positioned herself to cover both approaches. "This wasn't just Ashworth," Kellerman managed between pained breaths. "Too well coordinated." "The whole network," Brielle agreed. She spotted a sniper's position in the rocks and put 3 rounds into it. "They're trying to clean up loose ends." More gunfire peppered their position. Brielle counted at least 3 more shooters. Their attackers were tightening the circle, using the training course's design against them. Each barrier and bunker that was meant for practice now offered cover for their assassins. She checked her magazine. 6 rounds left. Her father's weapon was fully loaded, but his injuries made accurate shooting impossible. The sun beat down as smoke from the burning vehicle filled the valley. Somewhere out there, Ashworth was watching, waiting for his kill team to finish the job. Brielle touched the tattoo on her leg through her uniform pants. The coordinates that had made them targets were now their only hope for survival, if they lived long enough to decode them. First, they had to survive the next few minutes. Another explosion rocked their position. The killing ground grew tighter as their options dwindled. Brielle steadied her breathing, sighted her weapon, and prepared to make every shot count. Their lives depended on it. Brielle's mind raced as she assessed their deteriorating situation. The concrete barrier wouldn't protect them forever, and her father's breathing was becoming more labored. They needed to move, but each route seemed covered by Ashworth's killers. "The maintenance tunnel," Kellerman whispered, his military training evident despite his pain. 3 o'clock, behind the wooden targets. She spotted it, a service entrance used by range personnel. It would be tight, but it offered their best chance. The problem was getting there through the crossfire. "I'll draw their attention left," Kellerman said, gripping his weapon. "Give you a chance to—" "Not happening," Brielle cut him off. "I just found you. I'm not losing you now." His eyes softened for a moment, showing the father beneath the general's exterior. "Then what's the play, Captain?" Brielle surveyed the training ground, her tactical mind processing every detail. "The smoke from the vehicle fire. We can use it for cover. And those propane tanks by the target reset station? Create a diversion." Kellerman nodded, understanding immediately. Like mother, like daughter. She squeezed his uninjured shoulder, then took careful aim at the tanks. 2 shots rang out. The explosion sent flames and debris skyward, forcing their attackers to duck for cover. Thick smoke rolled across the valley. "Now!" Brielle helped Kellerman to his feet. They moved as one through the chaos, her supporting his weight while keeping her weapon ready. A shadow appeared through the smoke. Brielle fired without hesitation, dropping the attacker before he could raise his weapon. Another came from their left. This time Kellerman fired, his shot finding its mark despite his injuries. "You taught me well," she said as they reached the tunnel entrance, "even if you didn't know you were doing it." "Your mother did the teaching," he grimaced as she helped him inside. "I just passed on the genes." The maintenance tunnel was narrow and dark, lit only by emergency lights. Their footsteps echoed as they moved deeper underground, following the service corridor beneath the training course. Kellerman's breathing was growing more strained. "Rest here," Brielle said, helping him lean against the wall. She checked his wounds. The bleeding had slowed, but he needed medical attention soon. "They'll figure out where we went," he warned. "Ashworth knows these tunnels." As if on cue, they heard voices echoing from the entrance. Their pursuers were following. Brielle helped her father up, moving as quickly as his injuries allowed. They turned a corner just as gunfire erupted behind them, bullets sparking off the concrete walls. "Left at the next junction," Kellerman directed. "Leads to the old bunker complex." They reached a heavy metal door. Brielle could hear their attackers getting closer. She pulled the door open, helped her father through, then slammed it shut. The locking mechanism engaged with a solid click. The bunker complex was a maze of concrete corridors and storage rooms, originally built for civil defense. Emergency lights cast everything in an eerie red glow. Their pursuers would be slowed by the door, but not stopped. "You know what your mother would say right now?" Kellerman asked as they moved deeper into the complex. "What's that?" "Check your corners and trust your instincts." He managed a small smile despite his pain. "She always said you had the best combat intuition she'd ever seen." Brielle felt her throat tighten. "She never told me that." "She told me 6 months ago." At Brielle's surprised look, he continued. "She contacted me before she died. Wanted me to be ready. To protect you when the time came." Their conversation was cut short by the sound of the door being breached behind them, but something else caught Brielle's attention. Footsteps ahead. They were being flanked. "Colonel Ashworth," Kellerman called out, his voice carrying the authority of command despite his wounds. "Still letting others do your dirty work?" "It's nothing personal, Harrison," Ashworth's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness ahead. "Just cleaning up loose ends." "Like I did with Lisa?" Brielle felt rage surge through her, but her father's steady hand on her arm kept her focused. They moved carefully into a larger storage room, using the scattered crates for cover. Ashworth was close. She could sense it. "You've lost, Vincent," Kellerman said. "The coordinates in that tattoo. They'll expose everything. Your whole network. That's why neither of you is leaving here alive." Ashworth's voice was closer now. "A tragic training accident. Very unfortunate." Brielle caught movement in her peripheral vision. One of Ashworth's men trying to flank their position. Her shot dropped him before he could fire. The echoes hadn't faded before more gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Father and daughter worked in perfect synchronization. Kellerman, despite his injuries, provided covering fire while Brielle maneuvered through the shadows. Their attackers fell one by one, victims of their combined tactical expertise. Then Ashworth himself appeared, his weapon trained on Kellerman. But he had forgotten about Brielle. She emerged from behind a crate, her aim unwavering. "Drop it, Colonel," she ordered. "It's over." Ashworth's finger tightened on the trigger, but Brielle was faster. Her shot struck his weapon, sending it spinning across the concrete floor. The colonel stumbled backward, clutching his hand. "You're just like your mother," he snarled, "and too stubborn to die." "The coordinates she gave me," Brielle said, keeping her weapon trained on him. "They led to more than just weapons caches, didn't they?" Kellerman moved forward despite his injuries, his military bearing intact. "She documented everything, Vincent. Every illegal shipment, every payoff, every murder." 23 years of evidence, Brielle added, "hidden in plain sight on my skin. Mother knew you'd never think to look there." Ashworth's composed facade cracked. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. The people I work for are all about to be exposed," Kellerman interrupted. "Lisa's evidence names every conspirator, every corrupt official, your entire network." Heavy footsteps echoed through the bunker. Military police appeared at every entrance, weapons raised. Leading them was Major Sarah Chen, head of internal affairs. "Colonel Vincent Ashworth," Chen announced. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, treason, and multiple counts of murder." As MPs moved to secure Ashworth, Brielle kept her weapon ready. She had seen too much to trust this would end easily. Her instincts proved correct when Ashworth suddenly lunged toward a hidden weapon behind a crate. Brielle's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The hidden pistol clattered away harmlessly. Members of Parliament swarmed forward, securing him with swift efficiency. The data's already been transmitted, Chen informed them. Strike teams are moving on identified conspirators across 3 continents. The network is being dismantled as we speak. Kellerman sagged slightly, the strain of his injuries showing. Brielle moved to support him, their shared strength keeping him upright. "Your mother would be proud," he said softly. "She always said justice would come, even if she didn't live to see it." Medical teams arrived, moving quickly to treat Kellerman's wounds. As they worked, Brielle watched Ashworth being led away in handcuffs. The colonel's carefully maintained authority had crumbled, revealing the desperate criminal beneath. Over the next several weeks, the full scope of the conspiracy emerged. Military tribunals processed evidence gathered from the coordinates Lisa had encrypted. The weapons trafficking network that had operated in shadows for decades was exposed to harsh light. Brielle testified multiple times, describing her mother's final revelations and the events leading to Ashworth's capture. Each piece of evidence validated Lisa's meticulous documentation. Senior officials were arrested. Secret accounts were frozen. A corrupt enterprise that had claimed countless lives finally faced justice. The tribunal's final session was held in a secure military courtroom. Brielle sat beside her father, both in full dress uniform, as the verdicts were read. Ashworth and his co-conspirators stood rigid as their sentences were pronounced. "Colonel Vincent Ashworth," the lead judge intoned, "this tribunal finds you guilty of all charges. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." Similar sentences followed for each conspirator. Decades of crimes could never be truly balanced, but justice was finally being served. As Ashworth was led away for the last time, he glanced at Brielle. She met his gaze steadily, seeing not the fearsome enemy he had been, but simply a corrupt man facing the consequences of his actions. After the tribunal adjourned, Kellerman placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Lisa always said the truth would come out. She made sure of it." "She never stopped fighting," Brielle replied. "Even at the end, she was working to bring them down." "Your mother's final gift wasn't just exposing the conspiracy," Kellerman said. "It was bringing us back together, giving us a chance to be a family again." Brielle nodded, feeling the weight of the past 23 years lifting. The hidden coordinates that had been with her since childhood had served their purpose. The conspiracy was destroyed. Her mother's sacrifice had not been in vain. The evidence gathered from Lisa's encrypted coordinates continued to yield results. Each location she had documented revealed new layers of the conspiracy. Bank records, surveillance footage, communication logs, all meticulously preserved and hidden until the right moment. Teams of investigators worked through the massive amount of data, ensuring no conspirator escaped justice. The network that had seemed untouchable was systematically dismantled. Those who had operated with impunity for decades found themselves facing the full force of military justice. The final report detailed the conspiracy's complete destruction. Every weapons cache was secured. Every illegal account was seized. Every conspirator was identified and arrested. Lisa Townsend's careful planning had ensured total victory. Brielle stood at attention as the official findings were entered into military record. The case that had begun with false accusations against her ended with the exposure of decades of corruption. Her mother's legacy was complete. Justice had been served, and the truth had finally come to light. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's parade grounds as General Harrison Kellerman stood before his assembled troops. His dress uniform gleamed with medals earned over decades of service, but his expression held something softer than military precision. "After 35 years of service," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed ranks, "I am announcing my retirement from active duty." Murmurs rippled through the formation. In the front row, Captain Brielle Townsend stood at attention, her green eyes fixed on her father. Just 2 months ago, they had been strangers. Now, every word he spoke carried the weight of their newfound connection. "Leadership means knowing when to step aside," Kellerman continued, "and sometimes it means choosing what matters most." His gaze found Brielle's. "I've spent my life serving our country. Now it's time to serve my family." After the ceremony, father and daughter walked together across the base. Their matching stride reflected their shared military bearing, but their conversation was personal, not professional. "You don't have to retire because of me," Brielle said, glancing at her father. Kellerman shook his head. "I'm not retiring because of you. I'm retiring for you, for us." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I lost 23 years with my daughter. I won't lose any more." "And you're okay with me staying in?" Brielle asked, touching the captain's bars on her uniform. "More than okay," Kellerman smiled. "You're carrying on a proud tradition. Not just mine, your mother's too. Delta Unit 7 was about protecting people, about standing up for what's right. That's exactly what you do." They reached Kellerman's office, where boxes waited to be packed, decades of service condensed into cardboard containers. On his desk, a new photo frame held their first picture together, taken after the conspiracy's exposure. "I found something," Kellerman said, opening his desk drawer. He withdrew a worn envelope. "Lisa left this with her attorney. It was supposed to be delivered to me if anything ever happened to both of you." Brielle took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph she'd never seen before. Her mother in combat gear, standing beside a younger version of her father. Between them, a 5-year-old girl with bright eyes and untamed curls smiled at the camera. "The last photo of us together," Kellerman said softly, "before everything fell apart." Tears blurred Brielle's vision. "She kept us safe," she whispered. "All those years, moving from place to place. I used to think she was just paranoid, but she was protecting us both." "She was the bravest person I ever knew," Kellerman agreed, "and the smartest. Those coordinates tattooed on you, she knew someday they'd bring justice, bring us back together." Later that afternoon, they drove to the small cemetery where Lisa Townsend was buried. The modest headstone bore only her name and dates, a final act of caution even in death. But today, father and daughter brought something new. Kellerman knelt beside the grave, placing a small bronze plaque against the stone. It bore the Delta Unit 7 insignia, the same mark that had been hidden in Brielle's tattoo all these years. "She deserves to be remembered for who she really was," he said. "A hero, a warrior, the woman who saved our daughter." Brielle placed fresh flowers beside the plaque. "I understand so much more now," she said. "Why she trained me so hard. Why she insisted I learn military tactics even before I enlisted. She was preparing me for this life." "She knew you'd follow in our footsteps," Kellerman smiled, "even when she couldn't tell you why." They stood together in the fading light, two soldiers united by loss and love, by sacrifice and redemption. The tattoo that had seemed like a mother's desperate gamble had become the key to unlocking not just justice but family. "Thank you, Lisa," Kellerman whispered to the quiet air, "for keeping her safe, for bringing her back to me, for loving her enough to let her find her own way home." Brielle leaned against her father's shoulder, feeling the strength of their connection. The coordinates encrypted in her tattoo had exposed a deadly conspiracy, but they had revealed something far more precious: the truth of who she was, where she came from, and the legacy of love that had protected her all along. "She never stopped believing we'd find each other again," Brielle said softly. Kellerman wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "She was right about everything, about the conspiracy, about you becoming a soldier." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "About what an amazing woman you'd become." They remained at Lisa's grave until twilight painted the sky in deep purples and blues. The bronze plaque caught the last rays of sunlight, the Delta Unit 7 insignia gleaming like a beacon of truth finally revealed. Together, they walked back to the car, leaving behind the weight of secrets and separation. Ahead lay a future neither had imagined possible, a father and daughter united not just by blood and duty, but by the courage of a woman who had sacrificed everything to give them this chance. The tattoo that had started as a desperate mother's insurance policy had become something far more, a bridge across 23 years of silence, a key to unlock both justice and family, and a testament to the unbreakable bonds of love that had brought them home to each other at last. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.